a legal search firm that also provides consultancy and advice to the majority of law firms in Hong Kong, both Hong Kong firms and international firms. We've got a combined experience of doing that of over 30 years in Hong Kong. So a lot of our clients have been coming to us since the announcement for the consultation, asking our advice, also sharing with us their thoughts in terms of what they will be coming to the Law Society with, and really seeking to find out from us what their peers think about this. So we've got an excellent overview of the market in terms of the opinions on this relatively contentious subject. Yeah, I think there's going to be a risk that the quality of legal advice offered by the foreign law firms and by the firms that are practicing Hong Kong law but do have at the moment around 50% foreign qualified lawyers. The reason being that in order for those lawyers to get requalified, it takes quite a lot of time, it takes money, it takes resources, and not all of them are going to be able to do that, to gain that 2-to-1 ratio, which means that then there is a risk that they're hiring lawyers who perhaps they wouldn't have hired before by means of filling a quota, as opposed necessarily hiring them on merit. And in a market-driven profession, as legal is, like any other, you want everyone to be hired on their merit and quality, not necessarily just on where they happen to be qualified. The offshore sector here has been one of the biggest growth areas. I mean, there are firms who, 7 or 8 years ago had 10 people who now have over 100. So, I mean, it's one of the biggest growth areas. It's a vital part of the Hong Kong legal profession. As you mentioned, a lot of the companies here have vehicles in those jurisdictions, and they want people on the ground that they can speak with, and quite often people on the ground they can speak with in Chinese. So, at the moment, there are a large proportion of lawyers in those firms who are not qualified in the necessary jurisdictions, Cayman, BVI, Bermuda, and therefore, in theory, would not be able to advise on that jurisdiction of law, which would, drastically reduce the service that they're able to produce here, able to supply here, sorry. And it's very difficult to get them requalified. They have to have been qualified for a certain number of years in a Commonwealth jurisdiction. They need to fly to the jurisdictions. It costs money. Cayman, for example, is very difficult to do now. That will have a huge impact on both the legal industry here, but also just on the industry as a whole. It will affect how business is done. The difficulty they're going to have is at the moment, if they have a rough sort of 50-50 ratio, but practicing Hong Kong law, but also practicing a lot of foreign law, all of a sudden they're going to need to have 2-to-1, but they won't necessarily be advising on 2/3 Hong Kong law. So actually, they're either taking on lawyers who are Hong Kong qualified that they don't necessarily need, or they're paying to get lawyers re-qualified who actually do the majority of their work focusing on foreign areas. And that can end up with firms either, as I mentioned, the quality could go down, or that work isn't necessarily done in this office anymore. So you have less people employed by those firms, and they will feed the foreign law work back to those jurisdictions, which means less money, less employment in the Hong Kong legal profession. Well, I think that there is a risk that it could. Hong Kong its main selling point is the rule of law and the fact that it's the freest economy in the world. Any restrictions, anything that would potentially lower the standard of the rule of law is going to be worrying. But any restrictions on doing business here just simply make it less attractive. That's there is a risk that it can be seen as taking protectionist policies. And look, at the moment, if we look globally, there are a lot of countries in various different sectors taking protectionist policies, and Hong Kong is in an ideal position to gain the business that those places are losing and act as a genuine international finance and commerce centre. If it becomes more difficult for foreign law firms, more difficult for foreign lawyers to work here, and there's a risk that the standard may be lower, then it makes sense that Hong Kong is therefore going to be less competitive and less attractive as a business destination. And places like Singapore, who again have the rule of law and a primarily Commonwealth-based legal system, could well capitalise.